It all started with a very simple idea. Tell the stories of how successful middle market CEOs made it to the corner office. I'm Brant Handley, founder and managing director of Resource Options International, or ROI. We're the USA's premier executive search firm focused exclusively on empowering middle market companies to attract, hire, and retain A players while transforming top executives' careers and lives. ROI's Into the Corner office is dedicated to discovering how middle market CEOs advance their career, and we're making these remarkable and sometimes quite unbelievable stories available to you for the very first time. Listen and learn about the challenges they've overcome, the interesting people they've met along the way, and the lessons learned that steered these executives' unique journey into a middle market corner office of their own. I know you enjoy these CEO stories as much as I've enjoyed recording them, so thank you for listening today, and if you like what you've heard, rate us on iTunes or wherever you get your podcasts. I'm looking forward to you joining me on the next great middle market CEO adventure into the corner office. Today, my guest is Peter Greer, President and CEO of Hope International. Hope International is a global, Christ-centered economic development organization serving throughout Africa, Asia, Latin America, and Eastern Europe. Prior to joining Hope, Peter worked internationally as a microfinance advisor in Cambodia and Zimbabwe and as managing director for Urwego Bank in Rwanda. Peter received his Bachelor of Science degree in International Business from Messiah University and his Master's in Political and Economic Development from Harvard's Kennedy School. Peter's favorite part of his job is spending time with the entrepreneurs Hope serves, whether harvesting coffee with farmers in Rwanda, dancing alongside savings groups in Haiti, or visiting the greenhouses of entrepreneurs in the Ukraine. Peter has co-authored over 10 books, including Mission Drift, Rooting for Rivals, The Spiritual Danger of Doing Good, and Created to Flourish. He is husband to Laurel and dad to Keith, Liliana, Myles in London, and while his sports loyalties remain in New England, Peter and his family live in Lancaster, Pennsylvania. Peter Greer, welcome into the corner office.
Thanks so much for having me. I'm looking forward to this.
Great having you here. And we spoke a little bit ago, and I'm sure a lot's happened since then in the fast-changing world of Hope International, and I want to get to that in a minute. But we always like to kind of start in the early days, and tell us a little bit about your early years. Where did you grow up and what your early family life was like?
Yeah, so I grew up in Massachusetts, and that shaped me in many ways, including my sports loyalties. So I am born and raised a New Englander, but really got interested in this concept of economic development when I was in college, and I was studying in Moscow and had lunch with an individual who asked me if I'd ever heard of the Greer Bank and microfinance, and that conversation literally changed the direction of my life. I just became fascinated with this idea of using business in communities of poverty as a way to not just make a short-term impact, but to really invest in entrepreneurs around the world and see what happens with that. So that's really the turning point in my life in terms of my career.
Well, I want to talk a little bit more about that, but we want to build up to that a bit. We want to keep our listeners on here for a while because that area of microfinance is just so fascinating. It's really been a 21st century phenomena too. I know that in the late 90s, I think there was a bank in the Middle East, Bangladesh. I remember there was a gentleman that kind of got it going with a lot of, women financing women in business and so forth, and it's just exploded, and it's just done so many good things in various parts of the world. But back to you, mom and dad, any children? Were they in the financing world, or tell us a little bit about their background and what they did.
Yeah, so I came at this from a very different perspective. So my parents were involved in ministry. So my dad was a pastor, and my mom was incredibly active, serving and leading as well. And one of the gifts that they gave us kids was it wasn't about Christmas time having all kinds of things under the tree. We certainly did have that, but much bigger gift that they gave us was the opportunity to go and see. So they'd bring us on trips every summer. We'd spend time in the Bronx, New York, and then we would go internationally. So they really gave us an understanding of the world, and
That's awesome.
getting out of our little kind of bubble and expanding beyond that. And that was an incredible gift that they gave us.
Were they kind of mission trips? Were you going and, helping other people, or was it just more kind of observing, getting to know people in those various communities?
Almost always it was going and serving alongside individuals, so different forms of mission trips, and just was fantastic to, as a young kid, to realize the world is big, and for me I love trying to learn other languages. I love connecting with other people across cultural boundaries, and it just was a fantastic gift that my parents gave me.
I love it. So obviously grew up in a Christian home. When did you accept Jesus Christ as your Savior?
Yeah, so again, the gift of having parents this was their job, but this was their life, and there was never any sense of a different mom or dad on Sunday morning than mom and dad on Monday morning. They were the same people and really lived out their faith in a beautiful and authentic way. And so in high school is when that changed for me, that became not just my parents' deal, but it became the center of my life as well. And just been an incredible journey ever since. So yeah, really a lifelong adventure of trying to figure out how do we love God, how do we love our neighbors, and then what does it look like to invest in families around the world living in places of extreme poverty.
Awesome. What were some of the early lessons and things that you remember that mom and dad, taught you as you made these trips with your family to various different places in the country and the world?
There are some specific times that I just remember when we would be there. First person, if there was something a trash can that fell over, it would be my parents that would be there, helping to clean it up. There never was anything of hierarchy or
Very
position.
service-oriented.
It just was, they follow in the example of one who washed feet, and I think there's a lot of cultural relevance to that today. What are those jobs that no one else seems to want to do? And those always were the jobs that they seemed willing to do, not just willing, but joyfully willing to do. Washing feet, the cultural equivalent of washing feet is where I would find them. So I think that was one of the significant pieces. And then the other thing, remember my parents saying it on so many occasions, but if a job is worth doing, it's worth doing well. And so this ethic of hard work and really pouring yourself into something, mediocrity or just trying to do the minimum to get by, that was not the way of our family.
Never flew.
No.
What about school? Were you a good student?
I enjoyed school. I probably enjoyed sports more than school.
Right.
But I certainly found myself. There's certain classes in particular that
things that
I
you
really
probably
gravitated
fancied, right?
to.
More
no,
passionate
definitely enjoyed that. But opportunity to study things that I cared about, and I think that is the bigger piece of having the privilege of an educational setting that felt connected to the path that I was on, and that that's a motivator. That's an incentive to really pour yourself into it.
What were your favorite sports?
So through college, I played soccer and lacrosse. So those were my two. But right now, with my 4 kids, there is nothing on a fall day that I like more than being out there on the soccer field cheering on my girls. So it's been so much fun.
So you went to Messiah University, got your BS in International Business. Did you play sports there, or was it more, kind of club ball, so to speak?
Yeah, no, I got to play varsity soccer and varsity lacrosse while I was there. That was a huge part of my education, and Messiah College has quite a soccer program, so I got to play with some incredible teammates as well as some just terrific coaches as well. So, that definitely shaped my life, and certainly created some lifelong friendships with my teammates as well.
I love it. Was there a scholarship involved, or how did you kind of make the decision on Messiah for your undergraduate years?
So it was an athletic scholarship. Not that I would have received one anyway, but it's D3, so it's not possible to do that. But I did want to go to a place that I could play 2 sports, and I'd never been in a Christian school context, and really wanted to try that out. And it was just a terrific decision. So, that's part of the reason why I chose Messiah.
And international business, that kind of mom and dad's, taking you internationally kind of, inspire that, or was there something specific that you were looking to do, or does it go back to that meeting about microfinance?
Yeah, so that was actually in college.
That was in college,
Brant,
yeah.
I didn't wait for your questions. I kind of jumped straight to college on there. So, but yeah, no, that was while I was in college that I had that experience studying internationally. But really, the desire to get involved internationally, that started early. That started on those early mission trips, those early experiences. Probably when I was in 5th grade, we ended up spending time in Israel, and then we spent time in Hungary and then in Peru, in Ecuador. So just a number of different places that we got to travel as kids, and it certainly did shape the course of my life.
What was that first job that you took coming outside after your undergraduate year?
So I had this desire to get involved in microenterprise development and missions. And so I sent my resume out to every organization that I could find that was doing this work. Right. And the only thing I heard back was a postcard that said, "We'll keep your resume on file should anything come up in the future." So it was not the response that I was hoping for. So I moved back to Massachusetts, to my parents' basement, and not exactly the dream, but I just love, time is not wasted. And looking back, I needed some more experience. And so I ended up getting a job at a private high school, and it was in the business office, and I got to coach a bunch of sports, and it turned out just to be an incredibly special time at Lexington Christian Academy. But I kept this interest in international business and economic development, and ended up hearing the president of World Relief give a talk in Boston. Came up afterwards, and I will never forget it. I said something like, "I sent you my resume 2 years ago, and I still would love to be involved at some point." And he was so gracious. A few weeks after that, ended up flying to Chicago, ended up having an interview, and ended up signing a job offer without knowing where in the world I was going, because it didn't matter at all. I checked all the boxes. Are you willing to work in a war zone? Are you willing to work without running water? It just was yes, whatever it takes to get involved anywhere. Do you need to be paid? No. So it truly was anything to get involved. So I did end up then moving to Cambodia, to a rural branch office, and an incredible experience. For the first time, to have this theory, to have something that I studied, but then to actually see it, to taste it, to experience it, that was an incredibly special time.
Tell us a little bit about your work there. So were you working with small business owners? Were you working with larger corporations? What was the work in Cambodia?
Yeah, so it's really been my career to try and find those that the world would say are not worthy of investment. To find those that, whether it is because of the part of the world, or because of the current economic situation, or maybe because the lack of formal education, whatever it is, there's a lot of people around the world that the formal sector would say those people are not worthy of investment. And I just don't think that's true, and I also don't think it is the faith that I hold to, believing that everyone is created in the image of God, with gifts, with abilities, with dignity, and many times they just haven't had the opportunity to have someone to invest in them, or to say, "I believe that you have what it takes." You don't need to be a recipient of charity. You have what it takes to start, to expand, to grow, to be the provider. And so really that's what it was in Cambodia. It was in rural areas. Initially my job was in internal controls and fraud prevention, to make sure that some recommendations that were done from an audit department were actually being implemented. But much more fun than that was to go and hear the stories of families, to enter into their homes, to sit on their floors, to hear their stories, the incredible challenges that they had, and the incredible way that they were working so hard to provide for their family. And it was transformative to actually see the hardworking entrepreneurs, and even more than that, to see an outward focused church that was going and truly loving God and loving their neighbors. So I got to work alongside an incredible Cambodian team, And just to sit in homes, to hear stories, and just to be so inspired that what I had studied was actually real.
Yeah. Now, did World Relief actually provide financial support? Was it just advisory support? Combination of both?
Yeah, no, that is the kind of microfinance model, that it is not just access to training, but it actually is an investment. So it is, small loans, initially between $50 and $200 at the time was the average loan size. So small loans, micro loans, invested to individuals that didn't have a physical collateral, they didn't have the assets, but they certainly had the work ethic, and they had a social collateral. They had strong relationships, essentially, that they would walk through training together as a group, and then receive individual investments, but to essentially say to each other, if one of you doesn't repay, we will repay for you. So strong community. And it also allowed a structure of really strong, not just repayment rates, but really, really low default rates, as, again, the model, it worked, that individuals really could be invested in.
As an advisor, then, you would also evaluate these opportunities too, right? Or were they pre-screened before you would actually meet them?
So the great part of the model is, if I were to look at a couple different businesses in Cambodia, I would have a really hard time knowing which one is the right model for that context. I remember the foods in Cambodia being very different, and if I were the judge of which restaurateur would be the right one to receive an investment, I would make some bad decisions. So the way the model works is, it actually is the community itself that has to approve that the individual has the right character, they have the right competency, they have the right work ethic, and so they are the ones that make that screening decision.
So, Peter, what a wonderful time you had there in Cambodia. And after that, I think you went up to Rwanda. So tell us a little bit about how that was connection. Was that with World Relief, or was that with another organization?
That was also with World Relief. So there was a need for initially I was just going to go to be an advisor, but there was a sudden transition of leadership. So at age 24, I got to step in as executive director. And it was an incredible time. It really was. So this was 1999, so it was 5 years after the horrific Rwandan genocide.
Yes. And
the opportunity to go and to watch truly a nation go through a healing process, and also a rebuilding process, and to be there at that particular time, it was an incredible privilege.
And was it the same sort of job in that sense, where you were doing microfinance evaluation and making small loans, or was it a different mandate?
Yes, it was the different job, but same mandate, meaning that the mission of the organization was very similar, of investing in entrepreneurs through this microfinance methodology. The difference was in role, where I was given the kind of mandate to take this project and create a separate entity, institution, and hire staff and grow it and secure funding, and so really given the opportunity to lead in a cross-cultural setting alongside an incredible group of colleagues in Rwanda as well. So that was it. That was
now in both locations, and I know you went to Zimbabwe as well, but I don't know if we'll have time to talk about that as well. But in Cambodia and in Rwanda, you obviously worked with locals for the most part. I mean, folks that reported to you, and what were some of the challenges you had in those situations with regards to managing local folks? Where again, I'm sure you studied up and got some good cultural affinity, but things are done very differently in Africa and Asia. And what were some of the challenges you faced there?
The word that comes to mind is just privilege. It truly, it was a privilege to work alongside a group of global colleagues, and if anything, I knew how much I didn't know. I came in under no illusion that I understood the cultural context. I came in understanding I don't know what management looks like, but I do know that I really wanted to learn, and I really wanted to listen, and I really grew to love my colleagues in that. And I think that cuts across cultures. I think that as a management technique of listen first, speak second, I think that has applicability regardless of how different things feel. And maybe that actually was the greatest gift, was realizing that because it felt so different, I had to listen. I knew I didn't know, and yet maybe in our context here as well, maybe that same approach of a little more listening, a little slower speaking, might help all of us to continue to be effective managers and leaders, even if it doesn't feel like quite such a stark difference in cultural context.
Yeah, so true. So you eventually came back to Harvard, right, and got your master's degree. What was kind of the motivation in coming back and studying? Was political and economic development, I think, right? Was that the Kennedy School? Is that where you received your master's?
That's correct, and really an amazing set of circumstances where there was a recruiter from Harvard that just happened to be in Rwanda, which I don't think happens very often. But he just happened to be in Rwanda. We happened to have coffee, and he happened to be recruiting for a program that was relatively new at the Kennedy School, and essentially offered me a spot without ever seeing my resume, which I still don't fully understand, but I'm enormously grateful for. So the thought was to take a couple of years, look at the broader field, and to try and make sure that I'm continuing to learn and grow. And really, life is short. I wanted to take a step back, look at the broader field of economic development, look at the space that I was in of really investment, financial inclusion, and look at other areas and see what really kind of makes a significant impact and what aligns with the gifts and abilities that I have. And it was an incredible 2 years, but it really did reinforce my excitement, my desire to really spend my life focused on trying to share the hope of Jesus and trying to help people have a job. So that really just reinforced kind of the path that I was on and gave me some new friendships and some new skills to help me on that.
Fantastic. And obviously mentioning Hope, it was actually following that you joined Hope International. Now, did you come in as the president and CEO there? Or did you climb up the ladder? Tell us a little bit about, how you started your 17 plus years with them.
Yeah, so it actually was a final project where we were given a project, and I wanted to do something for a smaller organization that was really focused on this space. And so a friend connected me with Hope International, and I did a project with field research in Kinshasa in the Democratic Republic of Congo. And while I was there, I just happened to overlap with the president of Hope International. We spent a week together, and at the end of that week, there was an Indian restaurant in Kinshasa, and he said, I am going to be transitioning, and I'm interested in knowing if you would have any interest in taking my role. And so I did come in as executive director, and right after graduation, and that was 17 years ago.
That's fantastic. And so tell us just a little bit of a pause. Tell us about Hope, the mission that Hope is engaged with, and kind of the span of responsibilities, in terms of people and your mission at Hope International.
Yeah, and I so appreciate this. The focus that the organization has, it is not trying to do everything. It's saying we're going to do a small number of things, and we're going to try to do them as best as we possibly can. And so that small number of things that we're trying to do are church-centered savings groups to really gather individuals together, to equip them to save together, and then essentially to become a mini credit union where then they invest in each other's business ideas. Really creative way to mobilize capital, and also to equip churches to reach out to their communities. And then we also have microfinance institutions, regulated financial, banks oftentimes that serve those that are typically excluded from the formal financial sector. And we do that. It's been a time of wonderful growth, but we do that in 15 countries around the world. And we've served 2.3 million families over our history. And because the loans are repaid, we now have given $1.3 billion of investments in the dreams of entrepreneurs, and really trying to, again, just this alignment, the hope of Jesus, along with the economic tools, so that people can work their way out of poverty. That's our niche, that's our area of focus, and it has been an absolute gift to work alongside an incredible global team.
And again, we're doing this only in those 15 countries. Do you also do it in the United States, or is it only abroad
Yeah,
in those
we
locations?
only work internationally. We have a lot of friendships with organizations that do similar work in the U.S., and there are some great organizations, but for us, we really are focused exclusively internationally.
Yeah, awesome. And how many people in the organization now, and how many offices around the world?
Yeah, so we have about 850 full-time staff,
Wow.
and about 100 of them are in the U.S., and then the vast majority are in the places where we serve. And then we also have what we call church facilitators. Those are the ones that are on the ground doing the work, doing the trainings, and we have 2,500 of them that serve around the world as well. So, yeah, large team, but I am so thankful
Right.
for the opportunity to serve and learn alongside them.
And do you operate as a nonprofit or as a for-profit
Yeah,
institution?
we're a nonprofit, so 501c3, yep,
Nonprofit.
set up here,
Yeah.
and thankfully we have a great base of support, and they invest in hope. They donate to hope so that we can invest in entrepreneurs around the world.
Right. Awesome. So again, managing a global organization, it's a lot of people, obviously all over the world, lots of different cultures, languages, etc. What's kind of the common thread? How do you kind of maintain culture and success through that? Do you visit there a lot? Do you have weekly meetings? Do you have, calls? Is it one-on-one? Tell us a little bit about how you manage an organization with that scope.
Yeah, I don't think that there's a whole lot unique that we do apart from like a global organization that cares a lot about culture. The first thing is you got to define it. So what is the culture
Yeah.
that we're trying to create? And then you use that not just to be something that is put on a couple inspirational posters on the wall, but to actually live it out, that it impacts how we hire, it impacts how we interview, it impacts every time we have a staff meeting. We have this software that allows us to very easily kind of get a pulse of where we are in different staff members, and part of that is you can nominate one of your colleagues when you see them living out the passion culture. And every time we gather together at a staff meeting, I love reading some of those stories of people going above and beyond and celebrating them, celebrating it. I heard once that the classic
Yeah.
line from Drucker, you get what you measure, but a little twist on
Right.
that is you really get what you celebrate. And so we want to celebrate the
That's right.
culture when we see people living it out. So I'd say that's a key piece. And then, yeah, communication, using all different forms. We have global staff meetings that are so much fun. We gather together, and for the different offices that are at different time zones, they're recorded, and then they're able to watch them later. But a chance to really hear from the globe. So it's not just Hope International in Pennsylvania, where our headquarters are. It's not just us giving a one-way message, but it's really connecting the different offices, learning together,
Mm.
celebrating together. Huge piece for us is praying together. The obstacles
Yeah.
in this work are enormous, and it
Yeah.
is regular, not just over the last year and a half with all the lockdowns and all the challenges, but thinking about the disruption or coups or different challenges. And we want to be an organization that prays for each other regularly. So, yeah, all those things, you put them together, and I do think it's a pretty special place. But maybe just one final thing that connects to the way that we want to interact with the families that we serve, but it also impacts the way that we interact with each other, is we want to listen. So there are formal ways
Mm.
that we listen to the global staff with regular habits, regular occurrences. And we do the Best Christian Workplace survey every year, that third-party administered survey. But more than that, there's regular touch points to make sure we're trying to listen well to each other. Our chief operating officer, I love what he does. He has, instead of exit interviews, he has stay interviews, and he regularly listens. Yeah,
Retention
exactly.
interviews.
So
I
why
love
do
it.
you want to listen when someone's leaving only? I want to listen before
That's
they make
right.
that decision, and make sure,
Yeah.
are there things
Yeah.
that we can do to make this a great place to work.
What do you look for when you're hiring the people that you want to invest in?
There's so many of these questions, Brant, that I want to throw right back at you. This is your area of expertise. This is what you do. I keep it real simple for me. And, the other members of the team are looking at the levels of technical proficiency,
Yeah.
competency, and all that.
Qualifications. Yeah.
Exactly. I've got three things that I look for when I
Mm.
interview, and it's real simple. And my friend Kurt is the one who shared this with me years ago. But attitude, aptitude, and work ethic. The three things that you cannot train for. Those three things that without those, it is very unlikely that someone is going to be a high performer at Hope International. And attitude, meaning that full mission fit. Is this just a job, or is there something so much deeper than that?
Passion.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And then aptitude. We want people who are high performers and are here not because they couldn't get a job in a different setting, but we want high performers at Hope International, that aptitude. And then work ethic. It's just amazing, that hustle. So around the world, those are things that cut across culture and that we look for, and we do a lot of experience-based interviewing. So not asking people questions to tell us about even an experience, but to put them in scenarios that we can start to get an idea of how they would be in similar scenarios that relate to the job that they're applying for. So that's what we look for.
Yeah. Has the pandemic hurt you both from a fundraising standpoint as well as an operational standpoint? And if so, have you met some of those challenges?
I sense that there has been a lot of focus over the last year and a half for all of us. What's happening in our backyard? What's happening with our school district? What's happening with our local government? What's happening? There has not been a lot of attention on the impact of this last year and a half on families in poverty, and yet it has been this little known fact that the United Nations has been tracking the percent of the world that lives in extreme poverty, and every single year that number has gone down. The world has quietly and relentlessly been getting better as it relates to extreme poverty.
That's so encouraging to hear.
Except for last year. It was the first time in the years that they've been collecting these stats that the number of people living in extreme poverty skyrocketed. 100 million people fell back into extreme poverty.
Wow.
First time that number went up. And extreme poverty means living on less than $1.90 per day. And it means there is a question today of where are we going to get food, where are we going to get shelter, how are we going to survive? And that's the reality for a lot more families now that have been impacted. And it makes sense. The entrepreneurs that Hope serves, they are the micro-entrepreneurs. They are hustling. They are working hard. They are trying to provide for their family. But then imagine you have a lockdown. You are unable to work. And unless you have, and there is no payroll protection program, there is no unemployment, there is no kind of support that comes, and so and
no vaccinations for the most part.
No,
I mean, in the developing world, it's single digits at best.
And the whole thing of everyone has been impacted over the last year and a half, but not everyone has been impacted equally. And families in poverty, they have been hit hard. So it has been the hardest year for the families that we serve. And yet, I have never been more proud of the global team. They rose to the challenge, creatively pivoting and figuring out how we can come alongside entrepreneurs, and massive grace periods, additional capital to help restart their businesses. I've been so inspired.
That's terrific. And what about on the donor front? Has that also been, did the throttle come down off a little bit in the last year or so, or have people been able to see, obviously now that you've said this, and I'm glad our listeners are hearing this, the 100 million more people in poverty. I mean, that just seems overwhelming. How has it been on the donor side?
So in April, May, we planned for worst case scenarios. We planned for what are we going to do? And all of our scenario planning looked at revenue going down, fundraising revenue going down. There wasn't even a category for us to think about last year being an increase in support, and yet that is exactly what happened. The number of supporters went down, so we definitely did have a small, we didn't have any events in
Smaller
person.
base.
Exactly, so the number of supporters went down, but the number of those that walked with us responded with even more generosity. So we did have additional resources that we were able to turn into direct support to these entrepreneurs around the world. And, we heard from a couple different survey instruments, but like in the Republic of Congo, 49% of the entrepreneurs that we serve said they would be out of business right now if it were not for Hope International, that they would have gone out if it had not been for the way that we responded. And so I just, so thankful for our support
Fantastic.
base.
What a blessing.
It is.
Yeah, fantastic. And been able to retain people through it as well, particularly in the international locations. Have folks stuck with you through the thick and thin of this last year and a half?
Yeah, we always have had a very high retention rate, but last year was even higher. Yeah, it was very, very high. It was an all hands on deck year, and the team threw themselves into this. And again, that's part of the gift of this sort of work is, if I ever complain about anything, if I ever complain about, I just need to spend more time around the world and remember if water comes out of my sink, it is a good day.
Yeah.
If I open up my fridge in my pantry and I see food, it is a good day. If I lie down on a bed that has sheets, it is a good day. So I think that's
roof over your head.
Just been one of the gifts of this work is you do realize we have so much, and then that translates very quickly to, and how can we use all of this that we've given to try and make an impact in the lives of others. Amen.
Well, Peter, you've been very generous with your time. We always ask one last question of our guests. Many of our listeners are, kind of mid-20s to mid-30s, folks that are, obviously looking at their career, thinking maybe about transitions, et cetera. And, maybe some that have been in the nonprofit side, looking to go to the profit side or vice versa. What kind of career and life advice would you give someone who maybe has their eyes on leading an organization like Hope, but, is maybe, 10, 15, 20 years behind you?
The best advice that I got when it came to kind of questions around career was something that a friend pointed me to, but it's called constellation mentoring. And it's this basic idea that, if you look for one person to be kind of the mentor, you might respect certain parts of their life, and other parts you might not actually want to emulate.
Right,
and so, it kind of takes this idea of mentoring and really breaks it into a constellation. So I basically, early on in my career, broke it down into the 7 areas that I really wanted to learn and grow, and then found a person, not just to have a broad system of mentoring, but to really focus in on that one area. So that was a gift, and almost all of them have turned into lifelong friends that really have walked with me in this. So I wanted to know how to grow and scale a business. So I found someone who had grown and scaled a business in an incredible fashion, and to say, I'd love to do 2-2-2. Get together with you 2 times a year for 2 hours, and I'm only asking for a 2-year commitment on that. So really, I'm only asking you for 4 times to gather with you.
Wow.
And again, that intentionality around learning with individuals in a particular area that you want to learn and grow. And just one thing too with a constellation, and then also looking at, and who are you pouring into as well? Are there individuals that you're investing into? So that's really what I would say is, it's
fantastic.
Who are you walking with? Who are those people? Who are those voices that you're listening? And how are you surrounding yourself with people that you want to learn from, grow, that you want to emulate in that particular area? That has resulted in lifelong friendship and the best ongoing education that I could have imagined.
I love that. Constellation mentoring. I've only heard that one time before, and it was actually when our youngest daughter was looking at boarding schools. And I remember we were down to the last 2 or 3. And I remember the headmaster talked about constellation of care. But it was in the same concept, right? Different teachers that would do different things at different times. And, you got to have this whole constellation out there to help your student or our child in that regard with various different things. Wow. Fantastic concept, Peter. Well, listen, thank you so much for your time. Peter Greer, President and CEO of Hope International. God bless the work that you're doing, and thank you so much for sharing your journey into the corner office.
Thank you for listening to Into the Corner Office with Brant Hanley. We hope you enjoyed hearing our guest CEO story as much as we did. If you want to hear more CEOs reveal their journey into the corner office, please subscribe via iTunes and tell your friends and colleagues. For more information about Brant, Resource Options International, and the mighty middle market, visit www.goforroi.com. We look forward to having you join us for our next episode.